Hi everybody and welcome to another video. My name is Richard Seidlitz. I'm the owner of Redpants.lol. In my last video, I talked about headlights in a way that most car owners will never have to think about. But for us Gaydon-era Aston Martin owners, we do. This video is kind of the same because this time it's about this panel right here. Usually referred to as a waterfall or ski slope panel, this is the piece of interior trim that sits top dead center of the dashboard of most Gaydon-era Aston Martins. Now there are a bunch of things to know about this, and this video was prompted by a discussion about those things and some of the things that you can do with them when I was visiting Michał and I over at ECPS in Poland. I'll be jumping over to their stuff later on, which is going to tie in directly to this, but before we begin, a huge thank you to them for making this video possible, because it was their idea to discuss this. This panel right here is the one from my 2007 V8 Vantage with a manual transmission. And that manual part is important because it's going to be one of the things that dictates which one of these panels you get if you want to change or replace your current one. This one right here, being from my manual car, only has the one single start button, the hole right here for the start button. The other big gaping hole is this one up here, and that's for the nav screen. Now the earliest of the cars did have the nav as an option, though it is extremely common even on the earlier cars. And I think at some point it's either standard or de facto standard, but I haven't seen a non-navigation Vantage since probably 2007. If you have a sport shift transmission or an automatic transmission, and yes, those are different things, this panel is going to be the same for either of those transmissions because you're going to have two holes here and two more here for the various controls for it. When you have these different holes here, it's actually fitted for them on the back. Because mine is for a manual, it doesn't have those cutouts in the panel itself, but the trim piece that holds the buttons in is the same regardless. On the back, the other thing to see real quick is that you have this styrofoam, or not styrofoam, just foam. But it's basically just there to create a barrier for air coming out of the HVAC and into the vents to make sure it's actually blowing into your car instead of just blowing into the back of this and circulating around. It helps do that. So it's extremely common for this to come off. The glue wears off, it tears easily. It's really old. It's nothing special if you want to either grab some glue and put it back on, or if you just want to make your own foam strips. There's nothing special about them. Just match what's already there and you can make your own. It's cost next to nothing. But when you look at it, don't be surprised, because the vast majority of cars I've worked on, especially the older ones, are going to have at least some broken or missing or fallen off piece of foam there. Something to keep in mind, of course, is that this is a 14-year-old panel, so stuff like that is to be expected. The other thing that is part of that age, but also abuse, because I take my car apart constantly to show people how to do things, mine's actually broken over here. This is the hinge point on one side for the nav screen lid, which is right here. It's a thin piece of plastic, and over time and abuse, this wore off and broke. And because of that, what ended up happening is my nav screen wouldn't open and close properly, because this little bit right here, which is not a perfect circle, would actually sort of drop down into that brake and get misaligned and wouldn't open correctly. And then the motor that actually works the lid mechanism for the nav screen unit itself would feel that resistance and close. So what I would have to do is actually raise up with my hand to give it a little bit of help to get past that. Of course, the downside is I did that for so long that it burned out the motor, so it's a little wonky now. It's one of the things I'm fixing, among other things. It's one of my many projects is repairing that. But it does bring up something that, ties into this again, and that is that if your lid doesn't work properly, the nav screen lid doesn't open and close properly, the nav screen gears are a very common issue there. It's so common that Aston Martin has an updated set of those, which I have in stock at Redpants in the online shop. Make sure you check it out. I ship those all the time. It's actually really common. But the other thing that could happen is this could break. It's not as common, but if you needed to check, it's really easy to see because you just take this panel off and you can see it right there. If you need to know how to do that, the nav screen gear video I have is going to show that. But I'm going to try to repair it first. I'm just going to glue a washer onto the back side of this to see if that works, to keep it to make sure it all stays in place. If not, then I'm going to send this off to Poland or just have them send me a new one to have carbon fiber done, which again, I'll talk about later. Now, this is broken, again, age and abuse, but because it's also plastic. And that brings us to another piece of construction information, and that is there are two different materials that these are made of as far as the frame is concerned. One is plastic like this, and the other one is metal. And you'll see that on the back of the piano black version of this that we see in Poland in this video. The thing to know there is the metal does not, it isn't compatible with the plastic. So if you have a metal frame and a plastic lid, for example, it's not gonna work. You have to have matching components. And generally speaking, that shouldn't be a problem because the different finishes are always gonna have the different frames. So if you go for, if you get this metal finish that I have, you're gonna have the same plastic on all of them. It's just how they're made. The reason for that is because of the next thing, which is how the finishes are done. Being that this is the aluminum covering right here, there's a few different patterns that you can get. This one is like a really small hexagonal mesh. There's also like a micro swirl pattern, I think one or two more. But it's actually a thin piece of aluminum. It looks and feels like plastic, but that's just because the aluminum is so thin and there's plastic behind it, but it is aluminum. And the way it's held on here is by the edges being clamped down. It's crimped down on the edges of the panel. It works really well. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just something to know in case you do want to change this out. Let's say that you want to put a carbon fiber veneer on this. You're not going to do what you see later on in this video. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to unbend these. Now, of course, the big warning there is that if you do that, it's very, very, very likely that this panel will no longer be usable. This metal part will no longer be usable. So exercise caution and do it at your own risk. The reason being, of course, that once aluminum, especially aluminum, is crimped this way, it doesn't like to bend in other directions. So don't be surprised when you unbend this if it bends up somewhere else nearby. And if you try to put it back, you may notice that that had been attempted. But on these metal finished ones, the way they're held on is by that crimping on the sides. Aside from the metal finish that I have and others like it, there are also wood veneers. The wood veneers are made like most wood veneer using products. It's got the frame, some substrate, and then the wood veneer itself. There's also a carbon fiber that you can get from Aston Martin. I don't see it very often. I think that was a very costly extra. So you don't see it too often, but it is out there. And then there's also piano black. And piano black is the one that comes up the most often when we discuss these because they are very prone to cracking. The panels, basically, it's going to look like this, except this material right here is super shiny black. The problem is that it will crack at the corners of the nav screen lid. It's very common to see. If you haven't had that happen, good. I hope that good fortune continues, but don't be surprised if it does eventually happen because it is super common. Now, when it comes to fixing this, you may be able to find a shop that specializes in that sort of finish in piano black, but the other options are to sand it down, repair it, and then repaint it in a similar black. So you can get a piano black-like paint that you can do the whole thing over again. That is another option. When I had my Red V8 Vantage, I bought that car sight unseen, and when it arrived, it had a lot of undisclosed issues with it that I spent a lot of money fixing. One of the things that I never got around to, but was on my list, was this trim panel. It actually had piano black, but the previous owner, or one of the previous owners, had put a really crappy piece of carbon fiber vinyl over the top of it. You can see the cracks, at least I could, through the carbon fiber. I don't know if it was because the vinyl was done so badly or if the cracks were that bad, but I could actually see the problems with the piano black through the carbon fiber vinyl. Wasn't the prettiest thing. It wasn't terribly noticeable for a lot of people, but it was noticeable for me, especially since I drove the crap out of that car. And I really like that car. I actually kind of wish I still had it. But it is something that happens very often with the the piano black finish. So while I was in Poland visiting ECPS, that conversation came up and we decided to do some filming about it to show what it takes to go from piano black to carbon fiber the right way. There are things out there that you can do. So some people do like vinyl wraps over it. or some people have put a carbon fiber piece over it. But if you do the carbon fiber piece over it, it's not going to allow the buttons to seat correctly because it'll be too thick for them to snap in to that frame back there. So keep that in mind when you watch that bit of the video. It was also something that we wanted to film because there's a lot of stuff that Michał and I talked about that we found to be very common pieces of information or requests for information. And so we decided to make some videos about them. The headlights was one of the things. This is another thing. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you give Michał and Ermina at ECPS a shout out. Check the links in the description below for their YouTube channels and websites and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, enough about that. Let's go and see what it looks like to take a piano black ski slope panel, grind it down, and make it carbon fiber. One of the products that ECPS makes is a carbon fiber veneer. And when I say veneer, it's because of the way these panels are constructed. It is actual carbon fiber. It is not fake. It's not a wrap. It's actual carbon fiber. But it's done as thin as possible so that it can be put on this in a way that allows you to retain the buttons and the vents and the top without having any difference in the buttons being pushed out or not far out enough. So we're going to show you the process of what it takes to get this veneer onto this waterfall dash so you can have an end result that looks like this. We're in the room where they do the cutting and trimming of carbon fiber panels and start bonding them together. And this is also the room where they do grinding. Now, this is something that you can do yourself if you want to get this veneer and put it on your original ski slope. However, as you're about to see, it's not something I'd necessarily recommend because it's a little intense. Let's see how this goes. So what we've got here is the sanded down or the ground down frame. You can tell how deep this goes, and when you look at it from the side you can tell as well, but seeing it actually shaved away gives you an idea of how thick this veneer is. But you have to get it down that low because once you add in this carbon fiber, it's going to be a little bit thicker. Without doing this, without grinding this all the way down, first of all, the carbon fiber panel, the veneer is not going to actually adhere to this with the epoxy that you need to use to keep it in place. And then if you do put it on top of this, that's going to raise the level of this up to where the buttons aren't going to actually stick all the way in and be able to fix in place. They're not going to actually clip. So it's a matter of, the actual process of doing this. It's not just because it's because it's definitely not easy, but it's the way you need to do it to make everything fit right. And then you're still not done. And the reason is because once it's on there, you need to fill in the sides and then you need to buff those down and then you need to coat it again because any of that buffing that you do to finish the edges to make it just right can take away that clear coat and you'll want to spray it again. So and that is, the whole point of this video is that you can do this yourself, but when it comes down to it, the biggest issue is that it's extremely labor intensive and it's not something that you can do over, whether you damage this and you can no longer use it, or you damage the veneer and you have to buy another one. It's pretty difficult. So this is the end result, of course with a little bit of a change because this has got the custom larger opening, but you can see the finish of the veneer itself. This is actual carbon fiber veneer that has been overlaid. The edges have been sealed and then it was finished so that everything fits properly. Again, if you don't do all that prep work and the grinding and everything else, then the issue you're going to have is that these buttons and vents won't sit right because this will be so thick that you can't push the buttons in far enough to clip them in place. They'll be loose. So you have a lot of work to do if you want to do this, or do it the easy way and just send the panel to ECPS to do it for you. For many of us, having to send a panel back and forth between wherever we are and Poland can be a bit of a deal breaker, to be quite blunt. The cost of shipping back and forth, 2 directions instead of 1, plus the uncertainty of shipping things overseas, especially nowadays, seems like it's a bit daunting. And for a lot of us, we're not really going to entertain that idea. But having been there and seen how much work goes into these and looking at the costs, it's actually very reasonable to send it over to them and back. In fact, if I can't repair that, I'm going to do that with mine. Either that or I'll find another one, or if they have one on the shelf to send to me, that's what's going to happen. But I just wanted to point out when it comes to the amount of work that goes into it, how perfectly it has to be done, because you don't want to sit there and look at mistakes on your dashboard whenever you drive your car. It is something that you should definitely consider doing, is sending it over to them. It will make sure that the product's done correctly, that you get the finished product, and you don't have to worry about it. It's a lot of work that goes into it, and getting it done locally may actually be very expensive given the expertise required to do it the right way. This video came about during my visit to ECPS in Poland, and the reason for that is because it was one of the topics that me and Michał discussed that comes up fairly often in our circles. I mean, we both deal with a lot of the same people. We have a lot of overlapping customers, and we work in the same groups because we're both very passionate about our Aston Martins. But it was one of those topics we felt we should discuss because there's not a whole lot of information about it out there, especially looking at the sort of the construction and the materials and the options, and then the carbon fiber stuff that you can do to it, but what's required to do that the right way. It was worth doing a video. So if you like what you saw here, make sure you check out ECPS. Again, the links are in the description below. They've got a YouTube channel. Make sure you like and subscribe their stuff. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you like and subscribe my stuff too, because I would appreciate it. If you learned something here, make sure you check out redpants.lol. I do have an online store. That is where I pay my bills. So if you want to do that, please check it out. If you're feeling a little generous, I also have a support page. Feel free to use that. I appreciate it. A huge thank you to those of you that have. I do appreciate every single one of those, especially some of the notes I've gotten have been rather wonderful. So thank you to those of you that have supported me. But that is the video. I hope you like it. Make sure you check out redpants.lol for more Aston Martin parts and information. And I will see you in the next video.